And greetings once again to my fellow Orcs and Argonians of Tamriel. We are here today to take a look at the simple DNI post-processing file I have released for use with ENB for Skyrim Special Edition. DNI here stand for Days, Nights, Interiors, and this post-processing file allows for separate settings to be used for different times of day, as well as for interior locations. The simple DNI file is pre-configured to look pretty good right out of the box, though it can also serve as a good starting point for those who may want to customize their own game's image. This video includes a basic overview, installation instructions, and a look at all of the new available parameters. Those of you who saw my previous video may recall that with the default post-processing file provided with ENB for Skyrim Special Edition, the same settings are applied to all types of scenes. So settings that look good on a sunny day, for example, may appear too dark for interior locations or too bright for nighttime scenes, as shown here. The simple DNI file fixes this by allowing appropriate settings to be specified for time segments throughout the day, as well as for interior locations. Note here how the scene continues to look appropriate as day cycles into night and back again. ENB automatically interpolates between the settings specified for each time period, allowing for smooth and natural transitions between each. Interior scenes now also appear appropriate with ENB enabled, without having to modify any color correction settings. The simple DNI file also retains all of the original color correction tools that come with ENB's own post-processing. For those of you who just want to get out there and play, installation is very simple, though it cannot be performed by any mod manager. First, you must install ENB 0.310 or the most recent release available for Skyrim Special Edition. Please see my previous video for details on this process. To install the simple DNI mod, first download the archive from the Nexus to a location on your computer. I've included the Nexus link in the video description. Next, extract the archive, and within the extracted folder, we are going to copy both the enbeffect.fx file and the ENB series folder. Then we want to navigate to the Skyrim Special Edition game folder, which we can access from the Steam Properties menu for the game, then selecting Local Files and Browse Local Files. Now in the directory that opens, we simply paste the files from our clipboard and installation is complete. The two files installed are the enbeffect.ini file within the ENB series folder and the enbeffect.fx file within the game's root folder as shown here. In terms of compatibility, the simple DNI file will work with other lighting mods, such as Vivid Weathers or ELFX for ENB, though it is calibrated for Skyrim's own weather and lighting system, so some adjustments will likely be required to achieve a desirable look. Now, for the rest of you who like to dig into the details, let's get started. As always, we open our ENB menu by hitting Shift-Enter. In the Statistics section of the ENB Series.ini panel, we can see details about the time of day as understood by ENB. As each time segment passes, the corresponding value slowly rises to 1 and then back down to 0. This particular scene is governed 92% by day settings and 8% by sunrise settings, as you can see here. Now, if we look at the enbeffect.fx section of the Shader Parameters panel, we can see all of the new color correction tools, which apply to each of these time segments. And we also have separate tools for interior scenes. From the Technique drop-down menu, ensure that Default or ENB series is selected. These are actually both the same. As noted earlier, this scene is governed primarily by day settings, so modifying the brightness for night scenes has no impact here. However, if we now try adjusting the brightness for day scenes, the changes are clearly visible. All of the parameters here behave in this manner. Now, adaptation is sort of a tricky effect to explain. Basically, the effect serves to dynamically brighten scenes that are too dark and to darken scenes that are too bright, similar to how one's vision can adapt to different lighting conditions. We will take a closer look at adaptation a little bit later in the video. Tone mapping is a technique that maps the game's color data to the dynamic range which can be displayed by a computer monitor. And the tone mapping curve parameters affect the characteristics of this color mapping. At higher values, colors are generally darker and more saturated. And at lower values, colors are lighter and appear more washed out. These can be balanced with the separate brightness and saturation parameters to achieve many visual possibilities. Notice that I have these at higher values for sunset, dusk, and night to help darken things a bit during these times of day. Now the contrast tool here works in a similar way as it would in Adobe Photoshop, where higher values result in stronger brights and darks, and lower values result in more muted tones. Now the saturation tool, on the other hand, does not quite work as it would in Photoshop. Notice how raising the saturation here does in fact strengthen color values, but it also results in a darker overall game image. This must be considered when balancing the various color correction parameters against one another. And finally, we have what I call overbright dampening, which basically absorbs any excessive brightness in the scene that may have resulted from tweaking the color correction parameters. Notice here as I drop this value from 60 to 30, the sky takes on an overly bright and colorful appearance. And if I instead use a higher value, like 80 or 100, more and more of the scene's brightness is absorbed, producing a muted overall appearance. So for this parameter, you want to find a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. Now, if we scroll down in the shader parameters panel, you'll notice that all of ENB's default color correction tools are still available. These tools apply to the game image at all times and in all conditions, whereas the new tools affect only their assigned time of day or interior scenes. Okay, as promised earlier, let's take another quick look at adaptation. I will be using a long adaptation time and will set adaptation max to a very high value to help illustrate this effect. Notice now, when I look towards the bright sky, the image automatically begins to darken. And now, when I look back towards the dark door, the image automatically begins to lighten. So, using a higher value for adaptation max will cause the game to darken more in response to bright scenes. However, the inverse is true for adaptation min. Using a lower value for adaptation min will cause the game image to lighten more in response to dark scenes. Basically, for both adaptation max and adaptation min, higher values mean darker and lower values mean lighter, while the max value governs brighter scenes and the min value governs darker scenes. You generally want to keep these both pretty low, as higher values result in a duller overall game image. Now, I was originally planning to cover ENB's depth of field effect in this video, but I felt it was worthwhile to first release this post-processing file, so that people can really start to play with ENB for Skyrim Special Edition without having to disable most of its features for the sake of color balance. I will still be covering depth of field, lens effects, and other ENB features in future videos, so be sure to stay tuned. Until then, I thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.